The wildest thing I've ever seen happen in an insurance agency was a 23-year-old getting hired right out of college, within 4 months getting promoted to sales manager, within a couple of years getting promoted to director of operations, COO, and within 5 years of being there, getting promoted of CEO of the largest agency of this particular captive company in the country.
Wow.
And then after a year, he left and opened his own agency instead of staying there and continuing to run it. And now he's running that agency, and he's also running a consulting firm that helps other agencies sell better. Blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. Okay.
That's awesome.
So my name is Tony Canas, and I am with Insurance Nerds, Profiles in Risk Podcast, and Top Hat Recruiting. And in Atlanta, Georgia, kind of thing, Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a digital nomad, theoretically Atlanta-based, and an insurance dude.
Insurance dudes are on a mission to escape being handcuffed by our agencies.
How? By uncovering the secrets to creating a predictable, consistent, and profitable agency sales machine.
I am Craig Pretzinger.
I am Jason Feldman.
We are agents.
We are insurance dudes.
Boom! Wow.
That was a lot.
Look at that.
Jake.
Yes.
You wear many hats.
I do.
Oh no, you didn't, Mr. Jason.
Should I introduce myself, basically?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll make it as short as I can. I'm a giant insurance nerd, grew up in the carrier space, worked at 4 different carriers over the first 10 years of my career, did claims, did underwriting, did sales management, did a leadership development program, ended up being a middle market underwriter, got my CPCU and 9 other designations, and I fell in love with the topic of how do we engage and retain the younger generation, the millennials and now the Gen Zers in the insurance space. So when I left that big carrier that I was working at, I had been running their young professional employee group for a couple of years. I had expanded it to 4 new offices, and I really missed that work. So I started Insurance Nerds, originally a blog about insurance, careers, and technology, very carrier heavy. I started speaking at conferences about how to engage and retain millennials within insurance. One day, my girlfriend came home. She worked at a very, very large broker, at a global broker, first as an account executive, then as a corporate VP. Grew into the corporate side to the VP level. One day, she came home from manager meetings and said, "They don't get it. You have to write the book." So me and my co-author, we wrote the book. It's called Insuring Tomorrow. Normally, I would grab it and show it, but I'm on the road, so I don't have a copy on me. So basically, I've made my name on the topic of how to engage and retain millennials and Gen Zers in insurance. And when my book came out, I was working at a very large carrier as a middle market underwriter. And that very large carrier got very uncomfortable with having me on payroll. It didn't get to the point where they showed me the door, but I ended up leaving and going to the largest recruiting firm in insurance. I worked with them for 4.5 years. And then a year ago, July of last year, I opened my own little shop, which is called Top Hat Recruiting. So the funny thing is the Top Hat precluded the company name. The Top Hat came first. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Deeply passionate about this industry. And one of the things I do is I run chatwithtony.com, which is free career advice for any insurance professional. And I've been running that since a lot longer than before I became a recruiter. And it's
What's
fantastic.
that called?
Chatwithtony.com. And literally, it's a quick link to my Calendly, and anybody can get on my calendar. And I do about 400 of those a year. They're free. And I help lots of insurance professionals find the next adventure, whether it's carrier side, broker side, insurtech side, you name it.
Wow.
Okay, that's why you're on here, is because you are a very, very interesting dude.
Thank you.
And the topic that we really wanted to dive into you is the topic of, like, how do we retain the younger generation? And I think
Absolutely.
that it's something
like my
that
generation.
yeah. Back when they with the big bicycles with the giant front tire and tiny little back.
No,
one.
I had the first cell phone that you could.
I will say, so I'm going to take a wild guess that you're a Gen Xer. And you're not wrong, because your generation is in a really cool position. I'm an elder millennial. I'm 40 now, which is really weird because I've been speaking about kids in insurance basically for so long that I'm now 40. Yeah. And the industry is still only halfway getting it, right? But I talk to a lot of Gen Xers and chat with Tony, and I tell them, this is your time, because the boomers are finally retiring. Like, for real, this is it. It's no longer a drill. We've been
a lot
talking
of them
about
are just
for
dying.
15 years. Either retired, the older boomers have either retired or died. In the case of insurance agents, usually at the desk because they never retire, basically. It's too profitable. So the Gen Xers are finally taking over. And you guys are a small generation, 20 million people less than the boomers. So basically...
Well, we're exclusive.
Yes, it's an exclusive club. And while you will never have the numbers, you are inheriting the leadership roles, both carrier and broker side. Now, you're going to have to work with the millennials, which are a very large generation. But this is your time to shine. Be picky about your next job. Be picky about which agency you're going to go work for next or which agency you're going to buy next. Because you have the experience that my generation doesn't have, especially because a lot of my generation grew up in the freaking call center, whether carrier side or broker side. We just don't have the experience. Well, you guys started in the industry while the training programs were still fantastic, and you learned from the boomers, and now that they're retiring, you've got 15, 20 years of experience. This is your industry to run now. Don't let us down.
So, do you realize that Craig is a boomer?
Are you really?
Whatever. No, my parents are.
Okay, yeah. There's no way. I was gonna say you have to be incredibly young looking for. I think the youngest boomer is now what, like 53, 54, something like that.
Yeah, I'd be younger than that. Barely. Big 5-0. So I'm curious why there's this sort of perception that the millennials could be kind of entitled and maybe whiny.
We are
soft, maybe, but this isn't my opinion. This is just an opinion I've heard.
Yeah, no. I spent a lot of time researching this issue because it's definitely the perception, and basically there is some really good research that goes back literally hundreds of years. And again, I'm not a demographer. I'm not a researcher. I just bring the ideas into.
Are you a stenographer?
Basically, there's some really cool research that goes back hundreds of years, which has found that generations that grew up during times of abundance grow up slower, get married later, leave home later, right, settle down later. And the millennials, we grew up in the mid-'80s and the 90s, a time of historic abundance in the States. And we were raised...
Unprecedented tech, right? Unprecedented technology.
Unprecedented technology and unprecedented abundance. Right?
Yeah.
It's the economy, stupid, right? So our parents are boomers, and boomers had a really unique parenting philosophy, which was, I want you to have it better than I did, right? And they had the money also. So basically, they spoiled us, and then we came out into the working world expecting. And also, our boomer parents told us that we were special snowflakes. Right. And
they hovered those helicopters.
I have to be very careful with that phrasing. I don't want to go for the political definition of snowflake, but basically, you're a special star, and you're just going to rock it in the world, and you're going to do amazing. And we go and become the most educated generation ever. Also, the most indebted education generation for that education. Also, the boomers' fault who stopped investing in education. But anyway, we graduate, and it turns out life's not as easy as our parents made it look. Right.
So we're just so good at it.
Right. So basically, yes, we are a little spoiled, and we are growing up slower. And by the way, it's really hilarious that I continue getting paid speaking gigs to talk about millennials and insurance, and now Gen Zers. We're freaking 40 years old, right? I'm 40 and a half. The oldest millennial is about 42, depending on which demographer the years are a little bit fuzzy. But basically, interestingly, we have grown up. But we've grown up in very different ways from our parents. We ended up having less kids. We ended up getting married later. We ended up settling down later. We just look at life differently. Also, we are a mission-driven generation because our parents were workaholics. Our dads especially were workaholics. And they told us, don't do what I did. Follow your dreams, which is horrible career advice, by the way. Right? So
that is the worst.
We were
really
raised.
I don't know. I would argue the opposite. I think that's great advice because if you don't do what you love.
Yes. The problem is at 15, you have no idea what you will love, right? At 17, at 18, you have no idea. When I graduated college at 24, I had no idea what I was going to love. I grew up thinking I was going to work in computer science. It turns out if you can't do math, you'll never finish college in computer science.
Right.
So,
True.
And that's a lesson that I learned the hard way, little by little. But anyway, I graduated with a business degree, ended up working as a transportation fleet manager, got down since in 2009. I still hadn't found what I loved. And then I fall into insurance. Farm Bureau of Iowa does a fantastic job in training me. And I fall in love with insurance. And it's now going on, 13 or 14 years since then. I could not have possibly known that, right? So I've had people ask me, Tony, if you could go back to 18-year-old Tony and share wisdom, what would you share? And what I want to say is study risk management and insurance. But here's the funny thing. If I did that and Tony listened to me, which he wouldn't, but if he listened to me, he would have ended up going to a different university, because Iowa State University, where I got both my bachelor's and my MBA, doesn't have an insurance program. So that would have changed my entire life right there. And number two, this alternate Tony would have graduated from Temple or from St. Joe's or from Florida State or Eastern Kentucky University or one of the other major RMI programs.
Or University of Arizona.
Perfect. There's not that many of them, right? And would have started his career either in an underwriting training program or in a broker training program, would have skipped everything that I lived in the call center, everything that I lived in entry-level claims, and would have never seen the horrible stuff that happens in those call centers. Right. And thus, insurance nurse would have never been born. Right. I would be a boring corporate executive today instead of this beautiful life that I lead. So anyway, I don't even know how we got to this topic, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the reason why I don't like the do what you love concept is because it's more of like find what you love. And if you look at it, it's like at the ultimate funnel, right? It's just like if you want sales, you need a lot of leads to find the sales, the people that actually want your product. And it's the same thing. It's like you got to get a lot of experience to find out what you do and don't like, and to acquire a bunch of skills. Because like if I would have known this, like when I was younger, I would have done more jobs that I liked, realizing, hey, I'm acquiring skills. They'll add up, right? They compound over time. They add up, and the things I learned in Starbucks when I'm using today in business, and it's like it wasn't just making coffee. You know what I mean? It was
the advice should be try a lot of things early on.
Yeah,
focus on the things that match your strengths. Because if you do something you're good at, you'll enjoy it and you'll get good at it. And then once you choose something, dig in, like jump in with both feet and become a giant nerd on it. And then you won't work at like I'm a great example. I haven't worked a day in the last like 5 years because my last two roles have been perfect fits for me. But I was
don't slow down.
By the time I knew enough to find those jobs. Right.
Yeah.
At 20 or 25, I had no chance of getting it right.
So, Tony, you talk to a lot of, I want to switch gears here. Mm-hmm. You talk to a lot of candidates for the insurance world. And as you would know, probably the biggest gripe that every agent has is the people that are their employees, right? And then finding the new ones. And a lot of agents, and myself included in the past, didn't realize that it's another funnel, right? It's just like the sales funnel. You have to always be recruiting. If you don't, when somebody leaves or when they all leave at the same time or something like that happens, if you're not ready, you're down, right? Like you just lost bonus. You just lost everything for the year. The year's over. And so how do we better find the millennials that we say are a little bit tougher to work with? How do we find and attract those guys and gals that are actually going to love what they're doing in the same way that you do, so that they say, oh, I don't ever work? Because what we see and hear a lot with a lot of the agents that we interact with is, oh yeah, we spent all this time hiring and then they just didn't come back from lunch. Didn't show up, right? Or they don't want to come in on time, or they're always calling in sick. And it's the same thing over and over. And you hear it too.
Right.
Perfect. So on the recruiting side, because of the nature of being a third-party recruiter, we're expensive. So we basically only work with experienced people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bringing us in. However, having said that, on the chat with Tony side, I chat with many very young, aspiring insurance professional. Let's put it that way. Sometimes people that just happen to hear that insurance was a good career and give me a call before actually getting a job. Okay. So basically, number one piece of advice I have is make sure that you're putting people in the right seat of the bus, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you're hiring somebody who is very detail oriented and kind of quiet, right? A high C in the disc profile, and you put them in a sales role, they're not going to do well. On the other hand, when you hire a Tony and put them in a service role that requires attention to detail, I'm not going to do well. Like, yes, I should have some self-knowledge, and if the person is following my advice, they will have done strengths finders, they will have done the disc profile, they will have done some introspection, and then applied only for roles that matched their aptitudes, and then focused on growing in those roles. But that's not how recruiting works in the real world, right? Basically, whether you're a recruiter or you have one person in the agency that does recruiting as part of her job, likely like the head of HR or something, if you do have an HR person, right? Anyway, so somebody has a side role of recruiting, they are likely not well trained enough. This happens even at the big carriers. Those recruiters are not well trained enough to find people and put them in the right seat. No, they're trained to quickly fill the roles in front of them. They're not worried about whether that person is successful in the long term, right? Because what they're measured on is just filling roles quickly. Okay, so basically focus on making sure you have the people in the right seats. Number two, you have to train them. We have a horrible training program in a horrible training problem in our industry, and this is true both carrier and broker side. You have to train. You have to give them the tools. Number three, you have to realize that it's 2023, not 1955. I love the license plate, by the way. You have to realize that if you're putting them in front of a green screen, I think this happens less in the agency side, but it still happens in the carrier side. They've never seen a green screen before. They've immediately started searching for the next job. And also, you have to realize that millennials are mission driven. We have a great mission in insurance. We help people get back on their feet. But if you're not helping them see that, if all you're making them think is that their job is to sell, or if you're making them think that their job is to handle angry customer calls when they want to make a change or they had a bad claim or whatever, it's going to take them years to realize how their little job feeds into something important. You have to help them understand that from the beginning. And also you have to give them a career path. With brokers, not a big problem. Producers, like great, if you can sell, great career path. But your service people, historically, those roles have been staffed, the girls historically have been staffed by high school educated women who stay with you forever. And I've seen this in agencies all over the country, okay? Especially in PNC. I don't know about life and health, but in PNC, it's endemic. Okay, the girls will retire and you're not gonna be able to replace them because the demographic of high school educated women is disappearing. I graduated college in 2006. And from there to today, something like 55 or 60% of college degrees have gone to women. So there's just not a lot of high school educated women anymore. They have significantly out-educated themselves compared to men. And if you look at my generation of women and younger, they're just as smart. They've always been. They're just as ambitious. And they're better educated than the guys are. So many of them don't want to become a producer. What other career path is there within a normal agency? We have to give them a real career path, right? Otherwise, you're going to have and by the way, once they have some experience, they can work remotely for an agency anywhere in the country. And you will lose them, guaranteed, right? So we have to figure out great career paths for people, whether they're producers or not. I think that those are the biggest things we get wrong.
Woo, that's a lot.
I love that. That is a lot.
I spend so much time thinking about this, basically.
It's so true. The vision part of this, so like the mission-based part of this is something that I think I'm in the middle, kind of, right? I'm 43. So I understand, like for me, it was important. Like it took me a long time to get into insurance. Prior to that, I was bartending up until my mid 30s. So I was looking for the, like, what am I good at? Like, what am I, what's the perfect job? Like, that's why that kind of resonated with me, was because it was like, you can kind of find anything you like. And businesses only have so many parts to the business. It just has a different wrapper on it for different things, right? So like, for me, like a mission, a vision is more important to me than, let's say, like maybe, well, my mom is very mission based, but like, let's say like her generation or just a little bit older generation than me, you see it in a lot of other, I see this in a lot of other insurance agencies where they don't think about that. There is no mission, no vision.
Your average agent, especially agency principal, is a boomer. Okay, and I mean by age, not the whole by age. They're a boomer. Boomers, including my dad, were raised to be workhorses. They were raised like you work to provide for your family. You're the main income provider in your family. You work until you drop dead, and you did your job correctly. Okay. And they just don't even understand. Like my dad has a hard time. My dad has seen my presentation on millennials, and he's like, "Yeah, good for you. I'm glad that people pay you to do that." But
he's like, "I can't believe people pay you to do that."
Exactly. Like he's supportive. But he's like,
right.
I get it. If I'm paying you, do your job, right? Well,
100%.
That's what my parents said. Like, what are you doing over there? Like, well, we have a podcast. What's that?
So basically, so the boomer leadership, both carrier and broker side, it's even worse agency side because they tend to stay forever, has a very hard time understanding the idea. If I'm already paying you, why do I also have to motivate you? But it's the reality.
Right.
Otherwise, you lose. And the millennials is mission.
The boomers are a lot of tough love and scarcity, right? Because look at how they were raised by the I don't know what that generation's called, but the ones that were in the Depression, right?
Well, mostly raised by the silent generation.
Yeah, the ones in the Depression. Like, I mean, literally, if I don't go do this, like dig that hole, then we're not going to eat, right?
Right.
So it's interesting, right? So there was this, it's like two dualities. Like you said, the boomers then said, screw that. That was terrible. I want to make it great for my kids. And then we show up now and, kind of, I don't even know what my kids' generation's called. They're both
likely, 20. Like Gen Z. So basically the kids coming out of college today and for the last maybe 4 or 5 years are Gen Zers. Gen Zers, when I first started talking about generations, most demographers thought that millennials ended at birth year 2000. And now they've actually moved the line. And now they say that the last millennial was born in 95. Why 95? Because if you were born after 95, you don't remember the world before 9/11. The entirety of your life has been post 9/11. And as you and me, as we remember, the world is radically different from pre 9/11, right? So those kids were born, they don't remember the world before 9/11. They weren't raised by boomers. They were raised by Xers. And Xers are not boomers. Xers are skeptical. And so basically...
No, we're not.
So my boomer parents, or my generation's boomer parents, right, like we would get an 8th place ribbon on an 8-lane pool, right? When I came in 15 minutes, I halfway drowned. Came in like
congratulations! You came in 8th.
Trophy, right? So my little brother who's 20 and my sister who's 24, their generation's experience, especially my little brother, was very different. They were raised, well, mine weren't, but like the average Gen Zer was raised by Gen Xer. So my old boss, Brad Wadley, great story. Gen Xer, kid's 8 years old. The kid participates in some sort of sporting event, comes in, I don't know, 3rd or 4th out of 10. So he didn't do that bad. And he got a ribbon, right? They got home, Brad grabbed the ribbon and literally said, that if you don't win, this means nothing, and shredded the ribbon in front of
yeah.
Right? So Gen Zers are a lot better in many ways because they were raised differently.
If you're not first, you're last, baby.
Exactly. So they're much more competitive. Millennials, when we went to school, it was all about group project and all about self-esteem, right? We love group work. It's hard for us to not try to have a team to do things. Gen Zers are much more individualistic, like Gen Xers. However, Gen Zers won't put up with crappy technology. They will likely have a side gig. And many insurance companies are uncomfortable with like my Etsy store or whatever my side gig happens to be, because I want you fully dedicated to my thing, right? And then it gets even more complicated because now we also have a sub-generation of Gen Zers who ended high school and did a good part of college remotely because of COVID. And they don't have the in-person people skills
that
the rest of us have. And
I think part of that, I think part of that like lack of social skills comes from the invention of text, because it went from like calling to texting, right? And so there's no like salutation, like, hey, how you doing? It's just straight, where's my shirt, right?
One of the number one questions that I get from agents is, how do I get them to, and by the way, same exact complaint.
The phone.
Same exact complaint from claims leaders and even from underwriting leaders. How do I get them to freaking make a phone call?
You turn off their Instagram.
No, and the answer is you don't. We are, myself included, deeply uncomfortable with unscheduled phone calls. Now, if it's on the schedule, it's fine. But like calling you when you're not expecting my call, deeply uncomfortable. Why? Because we grew up, and Gen Zers even more, with asynchronous types of communications and the like texting
and extreme comfort.
So yes, and the beauty of an asynchronous type of communication is that I can take the time to think about my reply. I don't have to think in my feet. So we are deeply uncomfortable with either making like inbound calls. You can train us for that. Outbound, forget it. It is very, very, very hard.
It's almost like every millennial has ADHD and then needs to be treated that way. And this is but it's true, right? If you have ADHD, you're in this conversation, too many thoughts going at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to respond sometimes, right? Especially if there's other stimuli around. So I can actually empathize with that. Like I have an understanding of like that. Like but I have learned to, I grew up doing the phone, right? So I think
you know what works in general, maybe not to get us to an outbound call because that's almost impossible. But you know what works? Gamification.
Not here.
Gamification works, right? And of course, our boomer leaders think, oh, I will just put more money, right? I will give you a bonus for doing what I want you to do.
Right.
No, it only works to a certain level. If I'm if I'm making enough money, I won't make another uncomfortable phone call because you're offering me more money. But if you gamify it, you make it a competition. Now we're talking. And there are
100%.
Right? But my dad's generation, right? I go back to my dad. He's a great guy, but he's a very classic boomer. Gamificate, like what? It's a job. It's not supposed to be fun.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's a job. It's work. It's not fun, right? Why do you have to take the fun out of everything, Grandpa? You know,
dude. Gamification is the number one thing that helped our sales team for years. It was the number, and it's crazy how it can't, like, if you quantify the money. If you quantify the money off of it, it had nothing to, like, the actual motivation. It actually came from the gamification rather than the monetary compensation, like big time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
They love contests, like even like for me, it's like the only reward I can ever think of is money, because it's just like that's all that matters, right? It's my path to everything else. But for them, it's like it's like almost like I'm Chuck E. Cheese. I have to take the money, I have to convert it into something else, and then I have to sell it in some kind of game.
And it'll be cheaper.
So I go to 7-Eleven, buy a bunch of lottery tickets, stick it on a wheel of fortune, and then when they do something, they get to spin it, and then they win the thing, and they love that.
And the funny thing is, you'll spend less,
right, for a $2 scratcher.
Exactly. Now, you have to pay well enough to begin with, right? So we have to be able to pay rent, which is gotten stupid expensive. We have to be able to cover our student loans. Same story. Right, we have to be able to make a decent living. Otherwise, you're going to lose us anyway. But beyond that, most of us are not particularly money driven. We're mission driven, and we're fun driven. We're work-life balance driven. And by the way, getting into a game, you have to keep mixing it up. It can't be the same game. So honestly, like get a platform.
It's true
that does all that for you. Dear Boomer agency principals, don't read another sales book. Read Reality is Broken, and you'll understand why gamification is so powerful.
Broken. I agree. Reality is broken. I'm both
writing that down.
It's by a gamification researcher. She happens to be a woman, which is really interesting because most gamers are men. But absolutely fantastic, interesting stuff. And it goes back in history at how games have always been a powerful way to motivate people. And now we just have the technology to do it really, really well.
Any technology in particular that you've seen that's just dominates?
There's a million options, basically. I had one on my podcast just recently. I don't think it's gone live yet. I don't even remember the name. But yeah, like I'm not too worried about which platform, but you've got to make it interesting. You got to make it fun, especially for the hard things like aiming to call a cold prospect.